Well, I have to understand, and I'm sure everyone else listening too, as fellow journeyers, want to know more of your background. So both of you have accomplished a lot. And Israel, we can start with you in terms of going to school. You mentioned it just now. You went to a prestigious school. So from the outside looking in, it's like, wow, like check that off your resume. But what did that look like? What did that journey look like financially? And then, of course, Sunem, I'd love to learn more about your background and how what you went through too in your early education.
Yeah, so I actually got full rides to both Yale and Stanford.
Okay.
Yeah, I did that. I
Yes.
finessed my way. Yes, I finessed my way into getting enough funding from scholarships to even covering most of my car loan when I was in graduate school. So definitely a huge, huge privilege. But even though, Jamila, like I mentioned before, even though I went to these institutions, like I still graduated as a first generation professional of color with no financial literacy. And so I went to school with folks who came from a lot of money, but I myself didn't have a lot of money. And so when I quit my first teaching job, that's when I realized, like, oh crap, I have no generational wealth. I have no financial literacy. Even though I went to these schools and got full rides, which is a huge privilege not to a graduate student debt, like I still had no generational wealth, right? So that was like the pivotal moment of me being like, okay, these institutions are not going to save me. My community, myself, are we're going to save ourselves.
So when you went to the schools, what did you think you were going to do, right? Because then a lot of people who go there, like they're thinking like business or investment banking or high paying jobs. Did you always want to be a teacher?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's such a good question. Yes, I think right now I'm kind of going through this metamorphosis phase where I'm kind of shifting my priorities a lot and interest. But all my life I wanted to be a teacher, and
Hmm.
in fact, Sunem, like when I was in second grade, I would want to play like teacher, and I would be like, Sunem, do you want to play with me? And she'd be like, No, I don't want to play with you. So I was that person who knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I taught English to undocumented Latino folks here in Nashville prior to going to college, and so I knew that I wanted to go into education when I was in college. But when I got to Yale, because of the same reasons that you mentioned, like most folks who go to the institutions tend to pursue more like prestigious, high paying careers. And so I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and I interned on the Hill and the New York State Education Department. I just realized I wanted to be a teacher. And then I became a teacher, and I was like, whoa, this is wild. Like, it's so challenging, especially coming from my background and with my identities. Like, I was that teacher who would break up fights in the middle of the hallway. Like, I was the only openly gay Latino male educator that my students had. And so I was making a huge impact, but I was sacrificing my well being. And that's why, like, listening to your podcast was so important because it helped me realize that money can give me more options, right? Help money can give me um, options in my career and life, and I was able to do that and pivot from teaching. But yeah, long story short, I did want to be a teacher, and I got my master's in education from Stanford, and to become a teacher specifically.
And Sunem, what about you? By the way, who's the older sibling?
So I'm a year and a half older than him, but most people think he's older than me because he's the one who talks more. So that's
All right, and the height because he's pretty tall. Okay,
yeah, he is.
so Sudan, what about you? Tell me a little bit about your educational background and what you thought you wanted to do.
Yeah, so I went to college. So I also got my college degree paid off, but I did get student loans. But I really didn't need them. I just got them because so we're six in total. So our parents had six kids in total. And some of my other brothers, so we're the babies in the family. So some of my other brothers had gone to college and then got in student loans. And so I saw them like spending, using their student loans to spend on things. So I was like, oh, I feel like I need to get student loans too so that I can spend on things. And so I got student loans even though I didn't need them. I knew nothing about that I had to pay them back and that I had to pay interest on them. And so when I went to school, I originally thought that I wanted to be a lawyer, immigrant parents, all the things that you know about. It's like being an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor. And so I was like, I want to be a lawyer. But then I realized that I am too introverted to be a lawyer. I was like, I hate writing. I don't want to be speaking in public all the time. And so I was like, yeah, let me do something else. And so from when I graduated with about $16,000 in student debt. And then I decided to get a brand new car because everybody was telling me to get a brand new car. They're like, okay, well, you graduated, you're making some money. And at that point, I was making like less than $20,000. But I was like, okay, that's a lot of money, which is not. But during that time, I felt like that was a lot. And so I got me a car loan. And so my debt went up to $42,000. And then during that time, I was like, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm just going to be paying off the minimum loan. And then I believe in around 2016, I started realizing that all my money went to pay off debt. And I was like, I'm like, something has to change. And so I went down the rabbit hole of like personal finance and I started getting so into it. So in 2016, when I started listening to it, like there wasn't really much podcasts. There was like mostly blogs. And so I would consume a lot of blogs. And so I was like, oh, I really like personal finance. Let me go back to school and put me to a master's program in finance so that I can learn all
Mhm.
of this. And don't do that. Like, I was like, if I couldn't go back, I would tell myself, don't do that because I literally learned nothing about personal finance in my finance degree. It was all about like corporate finance. And I think I had like one or two classes to do with like investing, but by that time I had already learned all of that on my own. And so yeah, so I became debt free in 2019, thanks to like consuming all this personal finance. And I did start listening to your podcast too in 2018, at the same time as I started, because our sister shared it in this chat that we have with our siblings, and so I started like listening to that too. And then I started like realizing that like life is not just about becoming debt free, and I
Yeah.
realized that like you can take control of your life if you start investing and you want to become financially independent. And during this time in 2019, I was like working full time and going to school. And so I was really burnt out and I was like, I really want to become retired today. And so when I became debt free, I like pivoted to investing very aggressively. And because I realized the importance of investing, even though I got my master's in finance, like they didn't really teach me about the power of investing. It was just like, how to value a stock and all of that. But when I learned, I was like, oh my God, I need this. And then, so, I started to invest and then I told Israel how to invest. And for a while, Israel would not listen to me. He was like, no. But then when he quit his job, I think that's when he finally like started listening to me. And in fact, like we usually share this story that's a little funny. When Israel first started his teaching job, he came up to me with his check. He was so upset because like, who's taking money for this 403B? What is this? And he was ready to fight someone. But then I was like, hey, Israel, it's actually for your retirement. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds definitely how most people feel when they start to invest because it's such a, foreign concept. I mean, think about it for you too, because I also had a degree in business with a specialization in finance, but you don't learn about how to create wealth for yourself, right? You're learning more about like corporations and business structures. And I honestly think that's for a reason. They don't want you to know how to really build personal wealth. They want you to be indoctrinated into the system and keep you kind of on this cycle of working for a paycheck to pay for your bills and, get debt so you can stay within the system. So I'd love to know, Israel, in terms of your investing. So you said you were able to invest how much? Because what most people are not going to ask, right? Like, what did those teaching years look like? If you want to share maybe the range of how much you were making and how did you create such a big portfolio based on your salary? Was it mostly because of how did you were you able to save money in certain areas? What are some hacks for other people listening who want to do that too?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, all of these different ideas and strategies came from your podcast, right? So thank you so much, Jamila, again. But I was making 45K when I moved to Nashville back in 2018. Um, and I also bought a house because that's what a lot of immigrants are socialized to believe, that owning a house is the only way to building wealth, right? Through real estate. And that's not, I don't believe that anymore. But
Mm.
that's what I believed then, even though I had access to Sunem, who was saying, no, that's not the only way. Like, like I wasn't ready for her advice until I bought the house and I went through the whole experience myself. I was not financially ready to buy that house, but I bought it, right? And so I did that. And then I started to um, invest once I quit my first teaching job and then I got my side hustles and then I went back to teaching. Then I was like, okay, I'm going to start investing more aggressively in my 401k, 403b, right? So I started with 10%. And then I was like, I want to make more money and I also want to live in a more progressive city. And so I ended up moving to DC where I got a 15K salary increase. And I also was able to decrease my expenses. Even though the cost of living was higher there, I was able to decrease my expenses because I was able to live in the outskirts of the city with a really good friend from college. And we rented a house. It was four of us living there, and it was 3 bedrooms. And I split a room with my really good friend. And it worked out because she was a consultant at that time and she was spending most of her time in California anyway. And so I was only paying $350 for rent and I increased my salary by 15K. And then I was finessing, getting all the side hustles like the homework center and doing this club and working during the summers, and I was investing all of that money. And the school where I worked too was providing a 6% match to my 403b. So that made a huge impact, right? And so I was maxing out my 401, 403b, and I was then maxing out my IRA. And then the additional money I was also investing in a brokerage account. And then 2 years after living in DC, I decided I just didn't want to be a homeowner anymore. And because it was too challenging to be an ethical homeowner when I don't come from generational wealth, and there's so much to unpack there, right? But I ended up selling that house, and then I invested most of it to a brokerage account, and so I was able to build a six-figure net worth portfolio by doing all of that in that time span.
Right.